How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 314 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is the seed sowing guide for February, but it's the ornamentals version. So I've always done the edibles ones, and I've thrown in here and there a few flowers. But to kind of, I suppose, separate them and give them their own individual piece to keep it really concise, I've separated them out into two separate episodes. Reason for that is the approach is slightly different for both. So vegetables, flowers, they all need heat in order to germinate, but the level of heat that they need can be different, and the continuity of heat that they need is different. So edibles, once you get that germination stage through and you get up to the first true leaves, then they don't need much heat after that in terms of additional heat. Um, Whereas the flowers are a little bit differently. They're like more consistent and more heat over the coming weeks. So February obviously is a month where we can get going, but a little bit like the edibles, we just need to be cautious and make sure that we have lots of heat for the ornamentals. But we will look at the a nice list of seeds that we can germinate at this stage. But bear in mind that most of them, or all of them, in fact, will need some heat. So that's a case of you're bringing it into your house, you're bringing it into your windowsill, or potentially you're in a glass house, or you have a heated propagator or something like that. But it is really important that they have heat. Also in February, it's not seeds is not the only way that we can propagate and produce ornamentals. In February, we can still get tubers. We can still get of a lot of perennials. Actually, go through some of those in a moment. And of course, we have bare root still. When it comes to certain nurseries, we'll do bare root ornamentals, such as perennials, such as roses, and so on. So you have these three kind of options to create your own ornamental plants for the coming season, starting in February. So to have a look at the seeds, for any of you that were following along on the grow along, which I know I need to do a follow on, I need to do the next stage, which is the potting on of those perennials that we sowed back in September, October. And they need to be potted on now into the next stage of pot for development. So I'll definitely do that video with it. They need to be done anyway. So I'll do that video in the next week or 10 days. And that'll be live on YouTube and just show you the next stage. And pretty much a lot of the seeds that we sowed in that grow along are still applicable. We can still sow them now. The only difference with some of them is that you won't get flower in the first year. You'll get your plant developing, but it won't flower until the second year, especially with some of the perennials and so on. So a lot of annuals, you'll be starting at this stage of the year. You really have to, as I said at the start, you really have to watch for the heat and the constant heat on them at this stage of the year. But we'll have a look at those. So some of the annuals that we can grow, think bedding plants. So think of your pansies, your violas, your begonias. If you have really warm, constant heat, like that's going to need heated propagator. Even a windowsill can be a little bit up and down. You will definitely need, if you're putting it in a windowsill, you'll need to ensure constant heat. So just begonias definitely need a really consistent 20 degrees. If they can get that, then they'll germinate and they'll go ahead fine. But more than the other ones, the pansies, the violas, they'll grow pretty well once they get the initial heat and get germinated. But the likes of a begonia needs it a lot warmer. Same too with busy Lizzies. You could sow them at this stage towards the end of the month now for any of these really. Little bit early at this stage, not because they won't germinate, but because especially here in Ireland, when we can plant these out, we're looking at ideally they're not going to be able to go out into the ground in most places until May time. So that gives you February, March, April, 3 full months of minding before you're getting them out into the ground. June in some areas, depending on your last frost. So just bear that in mind, the length of time that you'll have to mind them. But to get them sowed towards the end of this month is a good thing and get them started, but you will have a little bit of protecting and minding on them. So yeah, violas, pansies, begonias, busy Lizzie or impatiens. We're looking at calendulas. They're really, really good additions to any garden. Cosmos. Cosmos at this stage of the year, because of the light levels that I spoke about on last week's episode, the light levels are quite low, so just watch for cosmos because they can germinate quite quickly, but can get leggy. So as they grow, it's a good idea to pinch them out and to allow them to thicken out so that you have a much stronger, much sturdier plant going in when you're planting them out. Um, then you're looking at things like nigella, love in the mist, bellflowers, sweet peas. Sweet peas can be sowed this month. The one thing about sweet peas, you won't sow them in the normal way. You'll sow them into something that's quite deep. So a lot of the time you'll see people sowing them into toilet roll holders. I personally find that that's a little bit messy. They break down and they don't stand up as well once they get moisture on them at all. So you can get little root trainers, which are longer, deeper seed sowing trays, and they're ideal for things like sweet peas and even peas, which don't like root disturbance, and that's the reason for this. They put out a long, deep root, but they don't like that root being disturbed when transplanting, and they can get a shock. So that's why something like a root trainer is useful. Um, Scabiosis is another one that you can sow. Pretty much think of any of your bedding plants, any of your annual bedding plants. They're all good to be sowing from the sort of mid to end of month onwards. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of the perennials that we covered in the grow along. So erigeron, lavenders, foxgloves, lupins, aquagelias, cornflowers, delphiniums, achilleas, rudbeckias, all of those perennials and biennials that you would sow. You're also looking at, a good few native plants can be sowed at this stage. Again, we included some natives into the grow along, things like oxeye daisy. They can be sowed this month as well. Again, but you're going to be minding them, you're going to be protecting them over the next couple of months. But that gives you, quite a range of seeds that you can be sowing. Heated propagators or even unheated propagators that can be closed up and something can be kept warm in your windowsill. They will be really useful and really important because the the consistency of heat required to grow flowers, especially over those first few weeks, is a lot more than your veg. Your veg is that little bit hardier while it needs the temperature to give the germination initially. It doesn't need as high a temperature typically. I know there are exceptions, but typically they don't need as high a temperature, and the temperature required for the first few weeks is less than what is required with flowers. So that's where a lot of people kind of fail with flowers, is that if you're going into a tunnel or into a greenhouse that isn't heated and you're not getting that consistency, you can get very sporadic results around germination. The other thing, as I mentioned last week as well, is when you're growing them on, particularly with veg, or particularly with flowers, should I say, particularly with flowers, you're looking to grow them once they've germinated and once they start to put out the first true leaves. You're looking to grow them a little bit on the dry side. So while obviously they need the moisture to grow, you're not going to have them sort of very wet at any stage, because that's where you can pick up diseases. They can be prone to disease, they can be prone to stagnation even when it's too wet. So we're going to grow them a little bit on the drier side and allow them to push on, but on the drier side. That means a little bit more sort of hands-on in terms of looking at them and monitoring them over a week-to-week basis. But it's worth it, because if you water them and water them heavy at this stage, you just end up with cold growing media that the seeds just don't like growing in. And you're definitely better to grow them on the drier side and allow it to really go searching for any moisture that's there. Obviously, as I said in that episode, we need enough moisture for them to grow, but we're still going to grow them slightly, as I say, on the drier side. The But sowing seeds is not the only way that we can generate perennial or ornamental plants at this stage. As I mentioned, we have loads of options around. If you look at any of the bulb suppliers, any of the garden centers, they will all have a selection of perennials which will be available now bare rooted in crowns, bare root crowns or bare root roots. And what you're looking at, things like agapanthus, peony roses, a lot of, I can't think of all of them offhand, but there's loads of them available as bare roots at this stage of the year. And the earlier you can get those and get them into your growing media, the better. They will sit there probably for the next while until we start to get decent temperatures, and then they'll start to move on. Things like agapanthus, you won't get flower off them for maybe a couple of years. They're quite slow to establish, but once they establish in your garden, then obviously you get great color for many, many years to come, and they're tough and they're hardy. Just at this stage, at that kind of bare root stage, they're small and they're young, so you're not going to get seed very, very, or get flower very, very quickly off that. But it's still way quicker than sowing them from seed, which you can do, of course, as well. Obviously, you can get bare root roses. It's a huge time of the year for bare root roses. They tend to be very economical versus potted roses to buy them in a bare root format. And the only thing I would say is that sometimes if you're not buying many, you're still always better to get the potted version because you'll just get quicker, stronger establishment from a potted rose as opposed to a bare root. But if you're sure that you've good ground, you know what you're doing, you're able to look after them over the coming months, then bare root is perfectly fine and will do really, really well. But they're all options at this stage of the year. So you can grow ornamental plants from seed, from tubers, from bare roots. And then the other thing at this stage of the year, and it's a category that's kind of overlooked a little bit, is your summer flowering bulbs. So the spring flowering bulbs, which is your snowdrops, your crocuses, all of those, they're a huge category of bulbs. But then the summer flowering ones, it's a lot smaller of a category in terms of the demand for them. But things like dahlias, so easy to grow from tubers at this stage of the year, gladioli, lilies, the tuberous begonias, either the upright ones or the hanging ones. They're all really easy to grow and really easy to be successful with from tubers and root zone or root tubers and bulbs at this stage of the year. Gladiola, I think I mentioned as well. So there's loads that you can do and loads of ways to produce ornamental plants at this stage of the year. Yeah, so that's kind of an overview. It's pretty much any of the perennial or the biennial flower seeds you can start to sow towards the end of the month. And again, pretty much all of the annual ones as well. I've only covered some of them here, but generally speaking, any of those can be sold at this stage of the year. But they do and that's the key message through this episode is that flowers sown from seed prefer, they need more consistent heat over a longer period of time than your veg and your edible plants. So that's why we're looking to use things like heat propagators and so on. So it's still easy to grow them, but if you're not going to be able to give them supplementary heat or additional heat, then wait another little while. Next month will be a much better month, and even into April, for a lot of them, it'll still be loads of time. The nature of the annuals, particularly, is that they're designed to germinate and to grow and to flower in one season. And even sown in April, you're still going to have great crop or great flowers over the coming years. So just again, as much as I say on the episode on vegetables and edibles, go slowly, tread carefully, it's double that message down for flowers and ornamentals because it is a little bit slower. Um, Definitely you can sow, but we're looking for, as I say, those warmer temperatures and more consistent temperatures for those. I hope that helped. It's yeah, that's the first time I've done a sewing guide on ornamentals. So yeah, we'll see how they go over the coming weeks. But we'll definitely continue to do them, especially over the next early part of the year. The first couple of months, they'll be vital in terms of keeping people reminded of what they can do at that stage. But I hope that helps. And next week's episode is a good one. It's covering the GLDA conference that's coming up. It's always a really important conference stroke seminar. And again, some really good speakers and a very, very good topic on it. So we'll hear all about that next week. But that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll tell you next time. Happy gardening.